The Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. We are coming to you live from the Green Space today with a Climate Week special. Now, for those of you here in the theater, you will soon see a basket of stuff that we will have on stage with us. That's because later in the show, we will invite you all to play Is It Recyclable or Is It Not? With a special guest from the Lower East Side Ecology Center, which offers various kinds of recycling services in the city. Green Space audience, get ready to look over these items later when the time comes and take your best guess. Is it recyclable or is it not? And listeners, you'll be able to play along at home too. We'll tell you how when the time comes. And in fact, listeners, you can watch the whole show if you would like to, because we stream live video when we're in the Green Space. So you can go to the Green Space website or the WNYC website, go to the Brian Lehrer Show page or our Twitter feed or our Facebook feed or WNYC's Facebook page. Any of those will get you to the link for the live video stream if you want to see us here in the Green Space this morning. Just to locate us in the real political world that we're living in this morning, here are two environmental things the Trump administration did yesterday. They prohibited California from issuing emission standards for cars and trucks that are stronger than the federal standards. California wants miles per gallon to be in the 50s under state law. Trump says no, it must remain in the 30s, which is the federal standard. But then Trump did say he would order the EPA to cite the city of San Francisco as violating federal environmental laws because San Francisco has a big population of homeless people. So it's homeless people as illegal sources of pollution, cars and trucks, not so much, according to the president, who has called methane freedom gas. So welcome to fall 2019, everybody, and welcome to the Green Space. So tomorrow, there will be a nationwide student strike and school walkout to call for meaningful action on climate change. And we are lucky enough to have two youth leaders of that action with us as our first guest today. One of them you might have seen on television before because Vic Barrett got to ask a question of Andrew Yang in the CNN Climate Change Forum for the Democratic Presidential Hopefuls the other week. In fact, let's listen to the beginning of that exchange to set this up.
Do you agree that the President of the United States has the constitutional obligation to end federal government support and promotion of a fossil fuel energy system, considering it endangers all citizens, especially young people like myself and future generations?
As I just stated, I would end all fossil fuel subsidies, and I'm going to take it a step further. I proposed a constitutional amendment that makes it the responsibility of the United States government to safeguard and protect our environment for future generations.
And it went on from there, and we're told that Vic Barrett, ironically, is stuck in traffic on his way to the Green Space and should be here any second. So we're going to ask him about his own contribution to breaking car culture when he gets here. But we will meet Vic in just a second. Also with us, Jade Lozada, age 17, a senior at the High School of American Studies at Lehman College in the Bronx. She is the arts coordinator for tomorrow's student climate strike and a member of the core committee of the group Fridays for Future, which argues for students to replace school every Friday with positive political action. And also here on the Green Space stage from WNYC and Gothamist, we have Clarissa Diaz, interaction and graphic designer for our data news team. Clarissa has a great and visual story out today on Gothamist called, guess what? Your plastics aren't really getting recycled. Well, some are, some aren't, as we will hear. Good morning, Jade. Good morning, Clarissa.
Good morning.
Clarissa, in fact, why don't I start with you? And I recommend everybody that everybody go to the Gothamist page to see this wonderful piece of visual journalism that you have up. Can you describe what you've produced?
Yeah. So Judith Enck, who I think you've had on the show, and she'll be on tomorrow.
Again
also.
tomorrow.
Yeah. So she had a kind of a plastics convening for reporters up in Bennington, where she's working on her organization Beyond Plastics. And so she invited me to come up and learn more about it. And I I just, I became interested in the topic and came back to New York and, tried to see what was going on in the city in terms of, just asking the simple question, what happens when we put our plastics into the recycling bin and where does it end up? And from there ended up into almost a kind of an investigation into where our recyclables are going and created this visual.
And one of your stats is that 91% of the plastics ever produced have not been recycled. So does that kind of show as a lie the idea that just because something could conceivably be recycled, industry is, misleading us by saying therefore it's okay to produce en masse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a worldwide statistic that is kind of the scientific consensus on how much plastic hasn't been recycled. And I think the thing is that when you think about recycling, normally you think when you recycle something, you return it back to what it was to create the same thing. So, but in the case of plastics, we don't really see that happening. We see that the plastics are getting recycled and kind of downcycled, if you will, into things like thinner plastics, like plastic bags and, decking material. Even our clothing has plastic fibers in it, backpacks. Some things that we don't even think about, and this kind of like shocked me as I learned more about it. Like the more I realized everything, how many things around me were actually made out of plastic.
In fact, one of the things that I learned from your article this morning is that when we recycle plastic bottles, for example, and other things that we might think of as hard or hard-ish plastic, sometimes it doesn't result in other bottles. It actually winds up in our clothing.
Right. Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And as you note in your piece, India and China have now banned importing plastic waste.
Yes.
Do you know the background of this? Like, why did the two biggest countries on Earth by population take in so much plastic from this country in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just the U.S. It was also like the West in general, the Europe as well, and the U.K. But for decades, really, they were taking in our exports. And then it's called the National Sword Policy that happened, that China banned these plastics coming in anymore. And part of the reason was, one is that, they were receiving these kind of, truckloads and boatloads of plastic waste, but a lot of it was contaminated. It was not pre-sorted. They had to go to kind of sort through it. They were kind of just buying it, and we were just kind of just sending it over to them as in its original state of trash. So it was a lot. It was too much for them to manage. Now that we've just keep producing plastic, and we kind of out of sight, out of mind, export it, I think we don't really see how much plastic waste we've actually created, but it's become overwhelming, I think, for these countries, and they simply can't keep up with it anymore.
Yeah, and you mentioned the sorting that they have to do. Later in the show when we play Is It Recyclable or Is It Not, our expert guest from the Lower East Side Ecology Center will talk about sorting. I think New York City is fairly good at it, but I know Judith Enck, the recycling expert and plastics expert, who you mentioned and who's coming back on the show tomorrow, is very big on being aware of good intentions that go bad when we put a lot of stuff into our recycling bins. Like, oh, this looks like hard plastic that could be recycled. I'm going to throw it right in there with everything else. Mm-hmm. But really, if it's not recyclable, then it pollutes the recycling stream. And that's one of the reasons, as I understand it, that China in particular has stopped taking our stuff.
Yeah, and in a way, it's not necessarily a bad thing that they're banning it now, because it will kind of force us to kind of deal with our own waste and kind of see it for ourselves. So, yeah.
Also joining us now, Vic Barrett, age 20, from White Plains, a fellow with the Alliance for Climate Education and a plaintiff in the generational lawsuit that you may know about called Juliana versus the United States, which argues in federal court that the whole next generation of Americans risks losing their, quote, rights to life, liberty, property, and public trust resources by federal government acts that knowingly destroy, endanger, and impair the unalienable climate system that nature endows. That's language from the lawsuit. And to be fair, that lawsuit was filed during the Obama administration, but it's having its day in court under Trump. So hi, Vic. Welcome to Green Space.
Hi. Thank you. Sorry for being late.
Somebody told me you got stuck in traffic. Were you in an actual car?
Yeah.
So breaking car culture a day at a time, right? And again with us too is Jade Lozada, age 17, a senior at the High School of American Studies at Lehman College in the Bronx and arts coordinator for tomorrow's student climate strike. And Clarissa Diaz from Gotham is still here too. So Vic, before you came in, we played the beginning of, well, we played your question to Andrew Yang in the CNN Climate Forum and the beginning of his answer. What did he say in sum, and how satisfied were you with his answer?
Yeah, I was surprised by his answer for sure. He responded that he thinks the Constitution should have a green amendment protecting the rights of nature and protecting the rights of people in terms of climate change. I mean, I was surprised by the answer, and I thought it was definitely a really kind of radical answer for a presidential candidate to have. But for me, I believe that my rights to have a stable climate are already afforded to me in the Constitution, and there doesn't need to be an amendment for that to happen. It says right in the Constitution that we have the right to life, liberty, and property. And climate change puts all of that at risk. So I feel like it's something that's already spoken to in the Constitution.
Yeah, and part of the Trump administration's response to the lawsuit is that there just is no right in the Constitution to a sustainable climate. I was shocked when I read that language. Like, this is a defense. We're going to go ahead and destroy the earth because the Constitution doesn't force us not to. Yeah,
the Trump administration has been taking really incredible legal measures in order to avoid the case, filing a lot of writ of mandamuses, which are basically just saying that the government will be harmed if they have to answer to the lawsuit, which is a really ridiculous legal tactic that isn't used very frequently. But we see that the Trump administration, not even in this case, but in a lot of immigration cases, has been totally abusing the judicial system.
Jay, before we talk about the climate strike tomorrow, can you tell everyone about the larger movement that you're involved with called Fridays for Future?
Absolutely. So Fridays for Future was started by Greta Thunberg in December of 2018. She was only 15 at the time, and she went outside Swedish Parliament and started striking every Friday against government inaction on climate change. It's just grown into this international movement where now all over the world we have students going outside their own national legislatures, and in New York it's the UN, and we stay there and say, we need action now, we need you to listen to us now.
And the website for Fridays for Future says, Greta requests that people strike in front of their closest town hall every Friday. So is the idea to not go to school on Fridays at all anymore and devote the day instead to political action?
We don't expect every single person to go on strike on Fridays, but definitely the point is that our education has no value if we are not given the opportunity as adults to use it. We are required by our governments to go to school, to learn. But what happens when we're adults and we're in a world where there's such a bigger problem on our hands that everything we learned is just useless? What we need is action now that will address our futures the way we need them to be addressed.
Now, listeners, if you saw Vic Barrett ask a question on TV, now you can ask him a question on the radio or ask a question of any of our guests, 212-433-WNYC. Anybody listening who plans to participate in the climate strike tomorrow, if you're a student or a faculty member or anyone else, or anyone may call 212-433-WNYC 433-9692. And audience here in the green space, just raise your hands and we'll come around with microphones. You mentioned Greta Thunberg, who of course a lot of people know now as this teenage climate activist from Sweden. She's in the US right now. As again, many of our listeners know, she will help lead a youth climate action summit next week. I understand simultaneous to the UN Climate Action Summit. Greta got to testify before Congress yesterday and chose to speak for only a minute as her statement. Here it is.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I have not come to offer any prepared remarks at this hearing. I'm instead attaching my testimony. It is the IPCC Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, the SR 1.5, which was released on October 8th, 2018. I am submitting this report as my testimony because I don't want you to listen to me. I want you to listen to the scientists. And I want you to unite behind the science. And then I want you to take real action. Thank you.
Don't listen to me, listen to the scientists. And she just offered the recent report from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as her testimony. Very smart. Vic, I gather you know Greta Thunberg, yes?
Yeah. Yes,
What kind of contact have you had with her?
Well, I testified on that panel with her yesterday, and also spoke at a press conference with her yesterday. I met her at COP24 in Poland, actually, originally, and then we got to reconnect at this event with The Intercept and Naomi Klein, where we talked about our visions of the future. And she's an amazing young activist and incredibly humble. When I approached her, she, before I even got to tell her all the reasons that she inspired me, she's like, I've been watching the lawsuit for a while. Everyone in the United States is doing great work. Even this last week, we've been in D.C. together with a lot of other young activists from the United States in meetings with members of Congress. And she's been really adamant that she doesn't want all the attention and that she does want to step back because, from a lot of the attention and put a lot of the power in the United States activists' hands. Especially, we were in a meeting with Speaker Pelosi, and the speaker kept asking Greta, do you have anything to add? Do you have anything to add? And Greta just, no.
Was she like, no, I refer you to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report?
Well, no, she just encouraged her to listen to the youth in the room that were living in the United States, and that had more knowledge about the political and climate issues in the United States, and has just been really interested in uplifting the voices of youth activists on the ground here.
And what did you say if you were in that testimony too? Were you asked questions?
Yes, I was. I spoke to the health impacts of climate change. So I spoke about anxiety and depression and how a lot of young people are just constantly waking up every morning and going to bed every night, knowing that the weight of the climate crisis is on their shoulders in so many ways. And I spoke to wanting to fight for future generations to not have to sacrifice so much of their lives to be activists. And yeah, we got a lot of interesting questions from some of the people on the panel. Some GOP congressmen that were a little aggressive at times, but also a lot of support from people.
You got a story to tell at all about aggression and how you dealt with it?
They just asked a lot of politicians do this weird thing where they have 5 minutes to ask a question, which seems a little weird, right? So it's
to ask all their questions. They get a 5-minute block to interview a witness, and then they go on to the next congressperson for 5 minutes, etc. Right?
Yeah. So basically, they get to just talk for 4 minutes and then add the question to the end. But yeah, we got a lot of questions about, well, if the United States isn't the largest emitter right now, why should we be the people to have to take the brunt of dealing with the climate crisis and things like that?
Did you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I just said that the United States has 25% of historic emissions, and even if we're not the largest emitter in the world right now, we're the second largest emitter with only having 3% of the world's population.
And so, Jade, what's happening tomorrow in the student climate strike? What should we expect around this area and around the country or the world?
Tomorrow at 12 p.m., students from all over New York City and some other states near us are going to strike at Foley Square. We're having speakers that day, and then we're going to walk to Battery Park, go around the Bull, around the Stock Exchange, and meet at Battery Park where Greta is speaking. But it's an intergenerational strike. Everyone is welcome to join us. This movement is youth-led, but ultimately the climate crisis affects us all, and we want representation of everyone there.
I think we have a question in the green space. Who had their hand up? There you go. Hi.
Hi. This is addressed to the younger folks here. There are credible experts out on the web. If you do the search term near-term extinction, there are people who with some credentials who think that it's hopeless and that we're doomed and there's not much we can do. Now, I'm not that pessimistic. I would say the odds of that, let's say the odds are 100 to 1 that that's real, okay? I would bet any insurance underwriter, if you give him those odds and the stakes, all of life on Earth, would say it's worth it to spend $100 trillion over the next 10 years stopping all global emissions of greenhouse gases, and $500 trillion over the next 100 years reversing and repairing the damage we've done. I think that's the kind of vision that I would love to see you folks put out there. And if we manage to instill that vision and those values into not just America, but the whole planet, we can transform life, the economy, politics, and culture globally. That's what I believe is really needed. I'd love your response to that.
By the way, I think I recognize your voice. Did you call us from a bus yesterday?
No.
No, that
wasn't me.
Okay, you sound. Was that you? Yeah. Why don't you talk next? Give him the microphone. For people who were listening yesterday when we were talking about breaking car culture in New York, I had no idea you were going to be here, so that's hilarious. I just misrecognized him as you. So if you heard yesterday's show, we were talking about breaking car culture here in New York with City Council Speaker Corey Johnson, who uses that term, and we had a caller from Brooklyn who said, I'm calling you from the B41 bus, and he wanted to talk about buses as one, underutilized method of breaking car culture in New York. So you are Alan from Brooklyn. Hi, Alan.
Yes, I am. And I have called from a bus before, but that was last year. I was to make a point separate from that. When the wonderful high school student over there was talking about what are we studying for in school if we're facing limits on our expectations of the future, there's an inscription on the entrance to the NYU Law School that I recall from a number of years ago. I think it's from Emerson, and it says something like, to what avail the plow or sail or land or life if freedom fail? You could flip that around. To what avail all of these freedoms if the physical world in which to enjoy them is failing? To what avail freedom if land or life fail? So that's pretty much a paraphrase of what you said, and I really salute the work of all you young people. We should have been doing this decades ago.
Thank you.
Alan, thank you. Jade, what's happening at your school tomorrow, the High School for American Studies in the Bronx?
At 10:30, everyone will walk out and go take the B train down to Foley Square to meet. I think that we all have what you said in mind, and to go back to your question, definitely for the strike, one of our demands, in fact, the first one, is no more fossil fuels. We want an end to all carbon emissions, of course, but we have to be cognizant of the political climate that we live in, and we don't want to endorse any one way to get there, because that hasn't worked so far. So what we're hoping to do is open the conversation to basically everyone in the United States, and hopefully we want a bipartisan solution here. We're not on any one side of the aisle, but we have to think of this as a global issue that affects everyone and that everyone can have a stake in changing.
Clarissa Diaz from Gothamist. I see that in addition to the graphic story you have about plastics on Gothamist now, you had a wonderful story the other day from Long Island about how the Shinnecock Nation there is using nature to adapt to sea level rise. So tell everybody, where on Long Island do the Shinnecock live and what's happening there?
So they live on a kind of peninsula jutting off of the town of Southampton. There's about 700 members living there. They have been, basically, the sea level rise is happening, and there's a 100% chance, according to an analysis by Climate Central, that they will see a 4-foot surge from a storm, which will pretty much inundate a lot of the island. The piece was kind of to bring awareness to this issue, so that they can receive help and funding to try and restore their coastline. And the methods that they have been using to kind of prolong, kind of the short-term methods that you can do for climate adaptation is kind of restoring and regenerating marshland and the shore around the reservation that faces Shinnecock Bay. That kind of can buy time. You can even buy a 20 to 30-year time window while you try to figure out a long-term plan for managed retreat. So this is, I think, going to become a bigger issue as sea level rises, is what are all of these coastal communities going to do? Where is the support for these communities that are very vulnerable to climate change?
Do you think, and I don't know if are enough of an expert on the topic to have an opinion about this, but do you know if the Shinnecock, that model that they're using that you just described, or if they make a claim that there's a lesson there for other places? Like, I'm thinking about the segment we did this week on the controversy over East River Park on the Lower East Side, where they want to raise it, I think it's 9 feet, because of future projected storm surges after we had Sandy and everything. And it's really controversial how to do that, and people don't want their open space taken away, and questions about how to do it, all of that. So I wonder if there are lessons from that natural approach that the Shinnecock is using for a much more populated area.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought, and I think there's just like a lot of social and emotional issues that, we tend to talk a lot about the scientific and kind of the policy issues, which is good, but that also needs to be integrated with the social and economic issues happening within the community as well. So,
all right, we have got, I think, lined up on the phones 4 more students who are going to be taking place in the school climate strike tomorrow. So let's hear from each of them briefly. I think we're going to pull this off. I think the first one is Azalea Danes. Azalea, are you there? Do we have you?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, Brian.
Hey there. Thanks for giving us a minute. Where do you go to school, and what are you going to do tomorrow?
I go to the Bronx High School of Science, and I'm actually one of the organizers, along with Jade. Hi, Jade. For the climate strike. So
wait, you're supposed to be arch enemies. Bronx Science and Lehman American Studies are right across the park. You're supposed to hate each other.
That's true. I mean, we do. When you enter one school, they tell you, the most important thing is that we beat the school down the block.
There you go,
Yeah.
when it comes to sports, right?
Yeah.
So, Azalea, what's one climate fact that you're focused on? Anything come to mind that you feel really strongly about or kind of jumps out at you?
Well, I mean, to speak to Greta's messaging of Unite Behind the Science, what I say often is that 97% of scientists, according to NASA, agree that climate change is happening right now and that it's a human-caused issue. I think that just speaks true to the fact that every single elected official, corporation, adult on this planet needs to unite behind the science and listen to the science, as Vic was saying earlier.
Azalea, thanks so much. Good luck tomorrow. Let's try another student. I think we have Anaya Thomas on the line. Anaya, are you there?
Yes, hi.
Hi there.
It's Anaya.
Anaya, I apologize. Where do you go to school, and what are you going to do tomorrow?
I go to school in Bergen County, New Jersey, and tomorrow I'm going to go to the New York climate strikes. I work with 0 Hour, which is another one of the major organizers for some of the strikes in D.C. and North Carolina, as well as New York.
Are you going to have a group coming in from there? Because unlike Jade, you can't just get on the B train to go down to Foley Square.
Well, I'm probably just going to take the bus down over there.
Is there a bus from Bergen County that people are organizing, or not really? You're just going to take it into Port Authority, the regular public bus, right?
Yeah.
All right. What's one thing about the climate crisis that really stands out to you that you find yourself thinking about?
One of the biggest aspects that I've been thinking about a lot lately, I was in D.C. with Greta and Vic, and it just keeps hitting me over and over that the climate crisis it's so important to listen to science, but it's also really important to listen to the stories and the experience that people have, and really focus on climate justice as well as the actual physical scientific aspects of climate change, because people are being affected in different ways, and we have to take that into account so we have a just transition.
I'm glad you brought that
renewable
up.
Energy sources.
Thank you for promoting our next segment, which is going to be with climate justice leaders, in particular from New York and New Jersey. So, Anaya, good luck coming in tomorrow, and thanks a lot for giving us a minute. Next, Zoe Inbar. Zoe, are you there? Do we have you?
Yes, hi, I'm here.
And actually, can we put Zoe and Soren on together? Because I think they go to the same school. Yeah, so Zoe Inbar and Soren Shapiro from Brooklyn Prospect. Is that the name of the school?
Yes, Brooklyn Prospect Charter School.
Soren, you there too?
Soren?
Oh, you're sharing
Soren.
a phone. I get it. Okay, we'll do you one at a time then.
Okay.
Zoe, tell us about the environmentalism club that I see you're in at the school and what you're going to do tomorrow.
Well, at the school, we're organizing some of the first environmental club because we haven't had much of that here, and we're getting a big group of students to come to the strike and start at Foley Square, go to Battery Park, all that.
Can you put Soren on? Can I talk to Soren? Is Soren home? Soren, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Hey there. What grade are you? What grade are you in?
I'm also a senior.
Cool. And what are you going to be doing tomorrow?
I'm also helping to lead the strike, so we're giving directions to Foley Square and handing out permission slips to go and get out of class. And we're making posters tomorrow morning for the strike as well.
Do you have any cool sort of graphics or slogans or anything for your posters? If you don't
nothing like that cool. So mine has changed the politics, not the climate. Pretty good.
Pretty good. It's straightforward. It may not win the sort of political cartoon award, but it gets the message out there. All right, Zoe and Soren, thanks for giving us a few minutes. We're almost out of time for this segment. Let me go around the horn on the green space stage one more time. Clarissa Diaz, for you from Gothamist. There was a fact in your piece that a lot of people probably don't know, that the fossil fuels industry, as coal plants are being shut down, sees plastic production as a growth area. So what's the relationship between companies we think of as producing energy, heat, fuel, things like that, and the production of bottles and other packaging?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that came from my interview with Judith, who was a regional administrator for the EPA. And basically, if you think about what is plastic made out of, traditionally plastic is made out of chemicals and oil. So if you think about petrochemicals and those industries that are working in oil and fossil fuels, and as kind of coal industry and plants are being kind of shut down, instead, what else can you make with ethane, which is a byproduct of hydrofracking? And that is going to be able to reduce even more plastic, even cheaper than it is today. So as there might be, as the market is shifting to kind of more renewable energy, the marketing of it could change. And according to Judith, this could create more plastic. So. And
Vic and Jade, I'm curious to get you for a second on sort of an optimism scale. Where would you put yourself, Vic, you as a 20-year-old, on a 1 to 100 scale, let's say, of optimism for your own future personally and for the world?
Yeah, on a 1 to what scale?
1 to 100, or you can make up your own. I don't care, really.
Yeah, I would say that being a youth climate activist right now, has to be characterized by optimism, for sure. I mean, it's not like this is always easy or fun or glamorous at all, but it's worth it because we can't just sit back and, like Jamie said, Jamie Margolin, the founder of Zero Hour, who was on the testimony with me and Greta yesterday, she said at one point, do you want to be able to look in your children's eyes and say that you did absolutely everything you could to protect them? And I think that's the scale that a lot of youth activists are working with. We're not looking at just optimism or negativity. We're just trying to be real at this point to make sure that we can even have a future.
Jade, same question.
I would say I'm at an 100.
100?
Yeah, I didn't imagine that I would be involved with this movement. I didn't imagine I would be on this show 2 months ago. I wasn't involved with Fridays for Future at all. But now I'm here, and I don't see any bigger priority in my life than tackling this crisis. And when I go to these planning meetings and I sit with the other organizers and to talk about what we're doing on Friday and just the crisis in general, we are all on that same page. And I think that there is this unity where even if you don't know these people, you're all here together to fight one common cause. That's so much more powerful than I think anything that I've ever witnessed before, and I don't imagine that you could ignore such a big group of people like that.
And that applause line is going to be the last word, except, do you know about the Fridays for Future theme song submission thing that's going on the Fridays for Future website?
We do have an official strike song, if that's what you're talking about.
Well, I saw that there's an invitation, and I'm going to play what's on there by a young songwriter from Europe. And I think there's an invitation for other people to submit possible songs. So we're going to hear one example as we go out with music. But please thank Jade and Vic and Clarissa.
What should we need to feel? We stand together here. We got a method here. We talking peer to peer. My earth is here to stay. No, you won't. I'll fight for my home. I'll fight for my own. All the way you go away. I got a mind to save our lives. No lie, no cry, no why. 'Cause now is the time.
Artists grappling with climate change in their work.
Climate grief is in the air these days, but there's also maybe, this hope.
How are we telling stories that propose radical change?
I'm Tanzina Vega, and that's next time on The Takeaway, weekday afternoons at 3 on 93.9 FM.
John Thur Cancer Center at Hackensack University Medical Center, a consortium member of the NCI-designated Georgetown Lombardi Comprehensive Cancer Center. More at jtcancercenter.org. The New York Historical Society, presenting Beyond Midnight, Paul Revere, a new exhibition about the American patriot and silversmith that explores the man behind the Revolutionary War myth. More at nyhistory.org. Leadership funding for WNYC's local and digital news initiatives is provided by the Jerome L. Green Foundation, a proud supporter of New York City's major cultural institutions.
WNYC, independent journalism in the public interest. 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the Green Space with a Climate Week special today. And remember, folks, you can watch the Brian Lehrer Show when we're in the Green Space, as well as listen. Our live stream is on Twitter or Facebook. Go to the Brian Lehrer Show or Brian Lehrer Twitter and Facebook feeds, or the WNYC Facebook page, or just go to the WNYC homepage at wnyc.org and you'll see the links for the video stream. So we talk so much about the climate on a global level, but we're sitting here in Soho near the Hudson River, and the two states on either side of that river are also taking action at the state level through policy. But are the policies enough? And to the point of this conversation coming up, do they take environmental justice into account? Do they address the cumulative impacts of climate change on vulnerable communities? Here to talk about some of their recent initiatives to address what they will call the cumulative impacts of climate change on communities of color in New York and New Jersey are Eddie Bautista, Executive Director of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, and Nicole Scott Harris, the Education Coordinator and Organizer for the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. Welcome, both of you, to the Green Space, Eddie and Nicole. Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the uninitiated, Eddie, is this a term that you use, cumulative impacts?
Yeah, unfortunately, government doesn't. But yeah, that's the term for us. Environmental justice is, we all should know by now. It's the fight for low-income communities and communities of color against not only the cumulative environmental burdens that so often get clustered in our communities, but also the lack of equal economic development opportunities, right? So but it is at the end of the day about the clustering and lack of cumulative analysis of how these exposure and emissions affect our communities.
Nicole, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, so definitely cumulative impacts is about the interplay of different types of socioeconomic and environmental justice factors, or environmental factors in general. So you have to think about a person who might be under a certain amount of undue stress because maybe they're lower income, maybe they have to work multiple jobs, maybe they have to walk through a neighborhood where the air quality is not at the appropriate standard on a day-to-day basis to go back and forth to work or to pick up their child from school. Their indoor air quality is substandard. And then you think about all the different sources that might be in their community that's emitting different type of emissions.
Is it possible to list for each of you a couple of top environmental justice specific issue concerns? I'm curious to, first of all, let the audience hear beyond an abstraction what kinds of things you're really dealing with on the ground. And also I'm curious to compare New York and New Jersey and see if they're basically the same or if they're going to vary very much. Eddie, you want to start?
Sure. So for us, it's look at the basic pieces of infrastructure a city needs to kind of, or at least while cities have traditionally deployed them, waste transfer stations, highways, even the legacy of manufacturing past with still literally thousands of acres of brownfield still in a rapidly gentrifying city, right? Undue exposure to clusters of power plants and sewage treatment plants. So, and that's just the infrastructure, right? When you talk about some of the private issues that we've got to deal with, whether it's as Nicole mentioned, housing issues, or dealing with kind of rampant development, and people keep forgetting that gentrification also has an environmental justice and a climate justice impact to the degree the city's not dealing with it. So over the years, our work continues on kind of traditional environmental clustering problems, but increasingly over the last 10 to 15 years, it's been also about climate change, about the relative resiliency or lack of resiliency of our communities. How do we kind of ramp up mitigation, adaptation efforts that we need to because of course we all know climate change affects everyone, but its impacts are not evenly distributed, right? So if we accept the premise that low-income communities and communities of color, whether it's here in the United States or the global South, that we're disproportionately vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, that's a whole other level of work that we're faced with.
Nicole, how about you? Top couple of things that your work has been focused on?
So I'll talk about targeting the Port Authority as the people who are in charge of the Port of Newark and Elizabeth, as well as all of these bridges and tunnels, one of them sort of bi-state entities that kind of operates in its own terrain in terms of authority, oversight, and transparency to the extent that it exists. The governors of both states don't have any particular individualized control over it, but they control it together with an appointed board. And so the accountability there is highly problematic, and I bring that up, it's attached to so many different things. So Newark and Elizabeth are the largest seaports on the East Coast. Newark is one of the busiest airports on the East Coast, which is closest to Manhattan geographically. So both of those entities are operated by the Port Authority. And so we're targeting the Port Authority to try and make sure that they're investing and requiring their tenants, even though the land in Newark is actually owned by the municipality, they have no control. Make sure that the tenants there, the different terminal operators and companies that have truck drivers that come in and out of the port, are investing in zero emissions technology, investing and zero emissions vehicles, and electrifying the port operations as much as possible, redrawing truck routes so that people are not going through cities enforcing things such as truck routes, because sometimes trucks try to circumvent tolls, which are a big thing in New Jersey, and also enforcing truck idling, which is also a major thing in New Jersey. And all of this stuff is buttressed against the Passaic River, which is the largest Superfund site in the country. So all of this is, kind of laying the terrain for what exactly is happening in Newark, this extremely lucrative entity. On top of that, we can talk about Amazon and the race to the bottom that occurred between the city of Newark and various different municipalities, including some stuff here in your own backyard. So we continue to focus on the port, the logistics industry in general, and the emissions and different types of ways that it contributes to environmental degradation, including plastics, which was talked about in a previous segment.
So really, maybe Chris Christie had the right idea, trying to close some lanes on the George Washington.
That actually speaks, I think, in volumes to the lack of transparency in an agency where you're dealing with that amount of money, and that a chairman would be unaware that there are lane closures in one of the busiest bridges in the country. So that's is really absurd when you kind of think about it. But
and listeners, if you live in any of the neighborhoods most likely to be heavily impacted by environmental issues here in New York and New Jersey, give us a call. How's the quality of your air and water? If you suffer from an ailment, perhaps as a direct result of your living environment, and you think it's an environmental justice issue, we want to hear from you. Or you can call us with questions for Nicole and Eddie regarding how you can get involved and find solutions, or whatever you want to ask. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. Or if you're here in the green space and you want to tell a story or ask a question, just raise your hand and we'll come around with a microphone. And again, if you're just joining us, listeners, our guests for this segment of our Green Space Climate Special are Eddie Bautista, Executive Director of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, and Nicole Scott Harris, the Education Coordinator and Organizer for the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. There was a report released, maybe you're both familiar with it, I don't know, by the Notre Dame Global Adaptation Initiative, and Newark and New York City ranked similarly. They're both high on the list of cities that were deemed least prepared and most vulnerable for or to climate change hazards. So I'm curious if you would want to put some specific meat on those bones, or say what some of the ways are that the city, at the city level of New York and Newark, might be preparing for the changes coming down the pike, to use a New Jersey word. But Eddie, you want to start in New York?
Yeah, so we've been monitoring how New York City's unveiling and deploying its kind of resiliency and adaptation work for the last few years. We produced something called the New York City Climate Justice Agenda, which looks at the de Blasio administration's implementation of WNYC, which is their kind of rebranded sustainability plan for the city. And we look to see how it matches up in terms of addressing the vulnerabilities of our communities. And, we give credit where credit is due, and then we also, highlight issues where they're falling short, right? So, we've got, for New York City, a standard of 80 by 50, 80% greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2050. And there's a range of activity that we have to do to hit those targets, which even now people are saying they're not ambitious enough. I mean, the people forget that when New York City adopted that standard, it was 3 days before the People's Climate March. And at the time in 2014, it set the standard for major cities across the world, right? Are we on pace to meet those targets? it's questionable, right? We've got a zero waste standard for New York City, and we're only now starting to grapple with the commercial waste sector, which is 2/3 of the city's waste stream, right? How is the city looking at investing in terms of coastal resiliency, right? We hear a lot about the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been identified for Lower Manhattan, but meanwhile we forget the Hunts Point Food Market, which is in the South Bronx, which feeds like 23 million people throughout the region. And we've learned now after Sandy that had Sandy landfall coincided with high tide for the Long Island Sound, that our food distribution system for the region, not just New York City, New Jersey, Connecticut, would have been disrupted, and nobody knows for how long. And we have yet to see $1 invested in coastal resiliency for the South Bronx. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Everybody should go on a road trip and see Hunts Point and that waterfront. That would be an interesting thing for New Yorkers from everywhere to do. How about Newark? Nicole, I know your office is based there.
Yes, so I work out of Newark, and one of the things that sort of perplexes me is about this obsession and fascination with development on the waterfront. Which Newark was classified as like in the top 10 of the quote unquote opportunity zones. And if you look at the listing of the places that were classified in the top 10 opportunity zones, a lot of it is concentrated around waterfront, which it really baffles me. And when you're dealing with a city that Newark has, a very rich history, lots of renowned people come from the state of New Jersey and the city of Newark specifically, and has all different kinds of assets, resources, including the people, which are its most valuable resource. And I just do not get this impetus to accommodate development that's contrary to common sense.
I guess it's just people want to live near the water because it's nice, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have peace of mind. It's nice to have low homeowners insurance, or it's to me that's what I think of as nice. And so in Newark, I say that because there's this economic revitalization that is happening, and a lot of things that are being developed and projects that are happening. And sort of the environment is in the background, and it's a retroactive planning as opposed to putting the environment at the center of the planning, which is kind of some of the objectives of some of the cumulative impact policy work that we've done in New Jersey.
How much do you see this as sort of a conflict of competing goods, both of which you want? I'm thinking about the case of Amazon in Long Island City, for example, where certainly people want jobs. They want the possibility for economic advancement in that respect. But we know all the downsides of Amazon that wound up getting the plan canceled because of the activism of people who didn't want gentrification, people who didn't want to support their relationship with ICE, their production of plastic packaging and shipping and all of that stuff. And yet, at the same time, just to keep going around in circles, people want the economic development. So how do you experience that in Newark, that conflict, that tension between two things you want, that sometimes it seems like they can't coexist?
Well, I mean, the economic development is obviously winning. I mean, if we're losing as a result of it is yet to be determined. But the economic development is winning. It continues to win. And we just keep ringing the alarm and continue to engage with the city administration, to continue to engage with the state administration on ways, and also we engage directly with the Port Authority's Port Division, and in the past, the Region 2 of the EPA, continuing to engage them on these conversations in the sense of urgency and necessity to take bold action. But, after Long Island City, Newark was still soliciting Amazon to come to Newark. Come to Newark. I went to a panel for the League of Municipalities last fall for the state of New Jersey, and it was the same week or within the week since Amazon had announced its 2 locations for a second and third headquarters. And it was a panel of municipal representatives talking about their submission to the Amazon contest. And there was no hindsight or retrospective on the fact that we were giving away the bag, like $7 billion. Right, like, and that wasn't even a factor in them making a decision for the location where they went. And so I was waiting for somebody on the panel to say, oh, well, at least we know next time we don't have to give away the whole bag in order to get something, that we really need to play from a position of our strength and recognize our various different assets and resources. And so that we're playing hardball and not, rolling out the red carpet for this entity that at the end of the day is not going to really meaningfully change the lives of the average Newark resident.
We invited callers to call in with environmental justice stories or questions, and we have a few. So let's go to line 2, Pamela in Queens. Pamela, you're on WNYC. Hello there.
Thank you. 2 quick things. One is I was working in South Bronx in a school complex recently in Mott Haven. 4 schools and students with disabilities built on a toxic waste site from a factory. And the monitoring that they're supposed to be doing of the air quality in there for the system that's supposed to keep the fumes from coming up, that monitoring was not being done, at least for the 2 years prior to when I was working there. And nobody's informed, not the staff, not the students, not the parents. Nobody has information about this. People are just going and they don't really know what they're being exposed to or not, because they're also not doing the monitoring. And I personally live in Queens, and you actually, I think, had a segment about this before, but like 3 blocks from, 3 doors down from where I live, there's a house, single family house, going for a normal price 10 years ago. It's going for $1.7 million. Anybody for the neighborhood could not possibly get in there to buy that. It's definitely going to be knocked down for a developer to put up something that isn't necessarily necessary, but there will be all kinds of waste and materials, and then, and it forces people to have to move, and that's a whole other emissions event that probably nobody's tracking. So those are 2 things just in my space.
Thank you for both, Pamela. Thank you for both of those things. So Eddie Batista, as the New York activist here, first of all, what can people do if they're now going to that site in the Bronx and they don't know if it's hazardous?
Well, what's interesting is that even the pathetic monitoring that they're doing or not doing now happened as a result of organizing and litigation. So South Bronx environmental justice activists sued, I think this was like 10 years ago when that school was being cited. And the fact that there's even the monitoring system that's in place was as a result of settlement talks, right, in litigation. But yeah, it's a real problem. I mean, I think, as we're running out of space in this city, we're going to continue to build, and we're going to build on places that, are going to be challenging, like brownfields, right? I mean, Nicole's point is right. Like, what's that definition of insanity? Doing things 100 times and on the 101st time expecting a different outcome. I mean, if we're serious as a society about having to do things differently because climate change demands it, that sense of urgency is, it's funny, at times you see fits and starts. Like, for example, this last session in Albany, we managed to pass, after 5 years of pushing, a coalition called New York Renews got something called the Climate and Community Protection Act passed. It was changed in negotiations with the Cuomo administration. They inserted the word leadership there. That's another topic. But
well, I was going to ask you about this because we did some coverage of this at the time when the legislature was in session earlier in the year. Right. The governor calls it a Green New Deal bill. And it does have some of the strictest time limits of any state in the country for serious emission reductions, right?
I mean, so that's a bill and by the way, I do have to say something about a Green New Deal. There's nothing new about a Green New Deal, right? We need to be cognizant that the frame of Green New Deal is pretty much a just transitions frame. It's a frame that was pioneered and implemented by environmental justice activists across the country. We have been pursuing that in different parts and it's basically this notion of, as we transition from a fossil fuel-based extractive economy to one that's a clean regenerative economy, we have to make sure that we're doing it in a way that centers both the frontline communities, the most disproportionately vulnerable, but the workers that are being left behind, or even some of the tax bases. Like in New York State, for example, people forget, like if we close some of these power plants upstate, the people that are going to get hurt the most in some of the upstate towns are not the workers in the fossil fuel power plant. It's the teachers in the local school whose tax base depends on that power plant, right? So the notion of just, that's what the Climate and Community Protection Act attempted to do, which was to challenge New York State to pass the most ambitious climate change law among the 50 states. And if you saw some of the coverage, it's actually even globally, it's kind of, and it's economy wide, right? So they passed the Assembly 3 years out of the last 4, and it stalled in the Senate, even though we had a majority of the Senate sponsors, because the Republican leadership and the IDC never let Independent Democratic Caucus, didn't allow that bill to come to a vote. Last year, you had the sea change of progressive politics, then that energy that we keep talking about, this urgency that people are feeling, drove out the 6 Democrats that were caucusing with the Republicans. And lo and behold, you got rent regulations passed, you got the climate law passed. And so that's an example of how legislatively this notion of just transitions and doing things differently, we have to force that on
But you
government.
feel, just because of all the good press that bill got for its emissions limits, you still feel it's not a strong bill in terms of climate justice, correct?
Well, so one of the things that they did was, so we had in the bill, it called for directing 40% of the state's clean energy funds to, again, frontline communities, the most disproportionately impacted. Of course, if you look at where the bulk of the infrastructure that's creating the climate change impacts in New York State, you can only cite those in manufacturing zones, right? So who do you think lives and works in manufacturing zones, right? So what they did was they changed the language of the bill from direct funding to 35% of the state frontline communities would benefit from. What does that mean, benefit? We had direct funding. You could argue that congestion pricing, another thing we fought for 10 years to pass, that we all benefit EJ communities, but that's not the context that we had. So we're not done with that fight. We're going to go back, but yeah. But by the way, it is the most aggressive climate action bill in the United States. We just got to insert a little more climate justice in there.
Let me get one more call on this from the New Jersey side. We're almost out of time, but June in Jersey City has a story, I think. June, hi, you're on WNYC. Can you do it in about half a minute?
Okay. Jersey City has a proposal which the City Planning Board rejected, and they have several buildings, about 10 buildings, that will now spread over maybe 8 blocks or so, that will now accommodate about 15,000 people. Now we're dealing with the water, sewage, and problem, the flood-prone areas, the schools, parks. There's no infrastructure for schools or parks, or there's and on top of that, the crowding. It's so crowded now. So the city wants to just go and pass it with all these developers and not look at a big overlay study of how this planning could be more sustainable and fiscally responsible for our community.
June, thank you so much. And so, Nicole, you'll get the last word in this segment. And it strikes me how, when we talk about climate change, people might come in assuming, oh, this is going to be about coal and oil and meat production. And people are also talking about housing so much.
Yeah. It's a big deal. First, I want to say that, legislation and implementation are two different things. Just because legislation exists doesn't mean it's being implemented appropriately. You look at city master plans or zoning plans, and industries, as a cost of doing business, they're planning on paying money to get variances, which means that they're able to plan and cite things in a particular neighborhood or area that it was not intended for, or that the community didn't agree was the type of zone for it. So it's supposed to be commercial, residential, but some kind of way, somebody knows somebody. I'm pretty sure a check got passed. And then eventually the person finds that they get a variance and they're able to cite the thing. They settle with the community, giving them some little, penny candy and make a nice little mural or a park or something next to a switching station, so you can do your research on that. And then see if people are content with that, and people are so overextended just trying to get from Monday to Tuesday that they don't have the capacity to be engaged in these long-term battles, and they count on that.
And so the fight for environmental justice goes on in the context of the fight for equity overall. We thank Nicole Scott Harris, organizer for the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, and Eddie Batista, executive director of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. Thank you both so much. And live in the green space today, this is WNYC FM HD and AM New York, WNJT FM 88.1 Trenton, WNJP 88.5 Sussex, WNJY 89.3 Netcong, and WNJO 90.3 Toms River. We are New York and New Jersey Public Radio, where it's time for the latest news. Live from the green space stage. Yes, audience, you've probably never seen him in the flesh before. It's Richard Haig.
Thank you, Brian. Iraq's foreign ministry spokesman says it will not join a U.S.-led coalition to protect waterways across the Mideast after an attack on Saudi oil installations. Iraq says Gulf security is the responsibility of Gulf countries. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called on his rival Benny Gantz to join a unity government after unprecedented repeat elections returned a near tie between the two main parties, but the offer received a cool response, setting the stage for continued deadlock. Britain's Supreme Court says it's aiming to hand down its judgment in a landmark legal challenge to Prime Minister Boris Johnson's suspension of Parliament. The country's top court must decide whether Johnson broke the law. He says it was a routine measure, but opponents claim he was trying to stop lawmakers scrutinizing his Brexit plans. If the government loses, Johnson could be forced to recall Parliament. This week marks the 2-year anniversary of Hurricane Maria striking Puerto Rico, killing over 3,000 people. At a rally at Capitol Hill, New York Senator Chuck Schumer accused President Trump of diverting funds from the recovery to finance the border wall.
It's an issue of disgraceful discrimination and bigotry. Plain and simple. Let's not beat around the bush here.
The Department of Homeland Security is planning to divert about $150 million from general FEMA funding. Administration officials say they will still have enough money to operate absent any new catastrophes. The city's plan to raise money from the private sector to fund repairs in public housing here in New York is coming under fire. WNYC's Anjali Kamat has more.
Involving private developers and landlords is central to Mayor de Blasio's plan to fix public housing. But dozens of tenants and advocates gathered last night in Chelsea to say no. Mary McGee is president of the Independent Tenants Association at the Fulton Houses.
The money is there. There is solutions. But nobody wants to take the responsibility to use taxpayer money properly.
She's supporting a proposal by the group Fight for NYCHA for how the city could raise $32 billion for repairs. It calls for removing billions of dollars in tax breaks on high-end apartments and adding a millionaire's tax. Both measures would have to be approved by Albany.
CUNY students are asking to be excused from class tomorrow to take part in the global climate strike. This is after the City Department of Education announced it would give public school students amnesty if they cut class for the march in Lower Manhattan. Timothy Hunter is involved in student government at CUNY's New York City College of Technology. He says it's a small request given what's at stake.
One time, just to save the planet, right? I've seen the posters all over CUNY schools. There is no planet B. There is none, right? This is our last chance that we have to make it right, and we need to make it right.
In a statement, CUNY said students are welcome to participate in events if their schedules allow it. A new statewide legislative proposal aims to ban those tiny plastic bottles of shampoo, conditioner, and body wash from hotels in New York. State Senator Todd Kaminsky of Long Island says the bottles are a big source of plastic waste, citing estimates that hotels just here in New York City throw away about 27 million plastic toiletry bottles every year. If the ban were enacted, hotels could opt to use those wall-mounted dispensers or a non-plastic packaging. And finally, would anyone like the chance to swim in the East River? The city's Economic Development Corporation is putting out a call for designs for a floating, self-filtering pool. It'll be built somewhere between the Brooklyn Bridge and the south end of Pier 35. The idea of installing a pool at one of the city's rivers has been proposed since 2010 by the nonprofit Plus Pool. The EDC is accepting design submissions through November 1st, so any pool designers here? Better get to work. It's a little chilly for a swim today. Sunny skies, highs near 70 degrees. Clear tonight with a low around 56. Tomorrow, Friday, sunny, highs near 81 degrees. And then warmer and more humid for the weekend. An East River dip, anyone? Sunny, highs near 82. Sunday should be sunny with a high near 85 degrees. That's the latest from the WNYC Newsroom. I'm Richard Hake.
On the next All of It, the legendary Mary Wilson joins us to talk about her life, loves, costumes, and of course the Supremes. Plus, acclaimed filmmaker Ken Burns discusses his new 8-part, 16-hour documentary Country Music. Also joining us, singer Kathy Mattea. Don't miss All of It, weekdays at noon on WNYC.
WNYC is supported by New Jersey City University. NJCU offers more than 44 undergraduate degree programs, 28 master's programs, and 3 doctoral programs, data science, cybersecurity, and more. njcu.edu/degrees. Mohonk Mountain House, presenting Wonderful World of Words, November 8th to 10th, featuring puzzles, games, and quizzes by crossword editor and puzzle master Will Shorts. Mohonk.com. The RAND Corporation, a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization pioneering innovative solutions to help make communities throughout the world safer and more secure, healthier, and more prosperous. Learn more at rand.org. Roundabout Theatre Company, presenting Scotland, PA, a new musical about ambition and greed with a side of fries. Now playing for a strictly limited engagement. Scotland, PA. Tickets at roundabouttheatre.org.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone, as we come to you live from the Green Space today for this Green in the Green Space special. For those of you who are here in the theater, you can now see this basket of stuff that we have on stage with us. That's because later this hour, we will invite you all to play Is It Recyclable or Is It Not? With a special guest from the Lower East Side Ecology Center, which offers various kinds of recycling services in the city. Green Space audience, as we mentioned earlier, get ready to look over these items now that they're out here when the time comes. I cleaned out my kid's closet, and so, no, I'm kidding. But we've got a variety of items for you to take your best guess. Is it recyclable or is it not? And listeners, you'll be able to play along at home. We'll tell you how. And in fact, you can watch the whole show if you would like to, because we stream live video when we're in the green space. You can basically go to any of our online locations, the WNYC home site, WNYC.org, go to the Brian Lehrer Show, Twitter or Facebook feeds, and you can get to the link for the live streaming video if you're interested in watching us. With us right now here in the green space are 2 guests. One is a lead coordinator of this week's Covering Climate Now project in more than 200 news organizations, all leading up to next week's UN Climate Action Summit. That's Mark Hartsgaard, who's the environment correspondent from The Nation magazine and author of books including Hot, Living Through the Next 50 Years on Earth. And Genevieve Gunther is with us, founder and director of the organization End Climate Silence. She's a lecturer at the Tishman Environmental and Design Center at the New School. Among her recent articles that we will ask about is one on Slate about kind of criticizing the use of the word we in a lot of climate coverage, and another particularly criticizing Jonathan Franzen's much-read article in The New Yorker called What If We Stop Pretending about climate change. We'll get to both of those. And just to prove she's a true Renaissance woman, she's also author of the book Magical Imaginations, Instrumental Aesthetics in the English Renaissance. How about that? For someone who spans the realms of knowledge. Mark and Genevieve, thanks for coming into the green space.
Great to be here.
So Mark, the Nation magazine and Columbia Journalism Review, so people know this context, organized this initiative in response to what you saw as media in action, including, incredibly, 0 questions on climate change in the 2008 televised presidential debates, 2012 televised presidential debates, and 2016, which is to say a climate question has never, ever been asked in a general election televised debate. So give us the big picture of what's happening this week.
Well, first, thanks for having me again, Brian. It's good to be back on the show.
Good to have you back.
And I have to very positively correct or update the information there. We had 200 news outlets last week. There are now 300 news outlets across the United States and around the world who have committed to be part of the Covering Climate Now collaboration. And all of us are committing to do a lot of high-profile climate coverage this week leading up to the UN Summit on Monday. Very, very happy to have WNYC as part of it. You guys were one of the early partners with us, along with The Guardian newspaper, which we chose as our lead partner because they are really the gold standard in climate coverage. You know, you mentioned how the U.S. networks, in particular, have been engaging in climate silence. You cannot say that about The Guardian. Not only is The Guardian's coverage very smart and great reporting, but they are playing the story big. Pretty much every day, if you go to the homepage of The Guardian newspaper, you will see a climate story above the fold, to use the old term. And that's kind of what we're especially trying to do, is to break the climate silence, because I've been reporting on climate change since the 1990s, a lot of that time overseas, and it was always striking when you'd come back from, say, Europe, back to the United States. The U.S. media coverage of climate change was at least 10 years behind what was going on in Europe. It was either silence or U.S. media were outright getting the story wrong by pretending that there's some sort of false equivalence between a NASA scientist and a paid spokesperson for the fossil fuel industry. And so we basically, this coverage, Covering Climate Now project began last October with the landmark report of the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the scientists, the 1.5C degree report, where they said basically we've got 12 years. By 2030, we've got to cut the emissions of heat-trapping gases on this planet in half. And this will require, the scientists said, fundamental transformations in the energy sector, the economic sector, the construction sector, agriculture, finance, etc. And I noticed that they didn't include the media sector. And that was where this project began, because it was my conviction that unless you also transform the media sector, you will not get the transformations that are necessary in those other sectors, because you won't have the public awareness that can create public pressure on governments.
So let me raise a problem and a challenge, and then we'll bring in Genevieve.
Sure.
Because a piece that you wrote for Columbia Journalism Review opened with something that Chris Hayes, who's also with The Nation, said about his MSNBC show, obviously a progressive media program, that, quote, every single time we've covered climate change, it's been a palpable ratings killer. So my question is, why do you think that's the case? And that, you know, even when Chris Hayes, who totally cares and is a great host and communicator, when he deals with perhaps the most important issue of the 21st century that his audience probably does care about, people tune out. It can't just be that Chris Hayes is bad at this, because he's not. So do you accept the premise that it's harder to sustain interest among mass audiences for this as opposed to other issues?
Look, Chris is my esteemed colleague at The Nation magazine, and he has been part of the Covering Climate Now initiative. And I doubt, frankly, that he would say that today. Because, for one thing, that quote of his came from 2018. But it is outdated.
Like the Stone Age, right?
Well,
2018.
I
can barely remember it.
But it is no longer supported by the data that people tune out from these shows. Maybe it was true in the past. As you may know, in corporate television, there is a high premium put on maximizing audiences, and there is an inertia factor. And so the people who are the bosses there are still thinking about 5 and 10 years ago, where you could argue that the climate coverage was an audience turnoff. But that is no longer the case if you look at the data, and that's especially true with audiences under the age of 40. And this is true, by the way, whether they're progressives, Democrats, Republicans, independents. Pretty much everybody under 40 now thinks this story is important. Look at the recent polls that, for example, done by CBS News, released a poll on Sunday, one of our partner colleagues on this. So that's no longer true, and I doubt Chris would say it's true now as well. And then a second thing, and it's part of the reason that WNYC is so important, and public broadcasting and public media in general is so important, is that we should not be judging the value of a news story by whether it gets a maximum audience. That is not journalism. That is commerce. And it didn't used to be that way. It used to be that the TV networks in this country and the radio networks were required to act in the public service, and that's what's great about public broadcasting. So I hope you all are supporting it.
Thank you. We did not plant that comment. Genevieve, tell us about your group, End Climate Silence.
Well, it's so funny that you bring up that comment that Chris Hayes made. He made it actually on Twitter in response to a thread that I wrote about listening to NPR on the radio and hearing 3 different stories that were clearly about climate change, about droughts in the Pacific Northwest, a massive flood in Japan, and also the question of how self-driving cars are going to change transportation. And I had been horrified that none of these stories even mentioned the words climate change. So that day, while I was eating lunch, I wrote a Twitter thread about it, and it went viral and sparked this conversation in which Chris Hayes said that anytime they had tried to do climate stories on CNN, their ratings would go down. And I actually intervened into that conversation and said to him, well, instead of doing discrete stories about climate change, why don't you just mention climate change in the stories about its effects that you're already reporting? You know, and Chris Hayes doesn't know me from Eve, but he actually replied to my tweet and said, you know what? That is something we can do. And at that moment, I got the idea for End Climate Silence. We have a very limited mission, and our mission is to pressure journalists and news anchors to mention climate change in the stories they're already reporting about its effects. They don't need to hire new correspondents or journalists. They do not need to create a climate desk if they can't afford to do it. They simply need to bring climate change into their reporting, which they're doing already, and connect the dots. And in fact, they need to be able to connect those dots in order to tell the truth, because already stories about extreme weather, about immigration, about energy, about geopolitics, about food, about travel, all the sections of the paper have stories that are telling climate stories. And if you have silence in those stories, as Mark was saying, the electorate is not going to be informed about what's already happening to us and what's going to continue to get worse if we don't stop burning fossil fuels now.
Do you think it's getting better, even in those couple of years since you had that thread with Chris and others? Because, well, the Takeaway had a spot yesterday with a couple of local TV meteorologists, and I don't even remember what cities they were from. But, you know, I think it used to be that the local TV weather people would say, well, we're doing weather. We're not doing climate. The weather and the climate are 2 different things. But these 2, at least, and they were on as kind of examples of a larger trend, were saying, we now feel responsible to bring climate in as context for our weather reports if, like, we're having the, you know, the hottest summer in a row for the 4th year in a row here in television market A, not just say, well, it's going to be 95 degrees today, get out the eggs to fry on the sidewalk, you know. So is it getting better?
Oh, it's absolutely getting better. And actually my group in particular, has only been formed for a year. And print journalism has completely transformed, with the notable exception of the Wall Street Journal and USA Today, but all other print outlets have increased their climate coverage markedly. The TV news networks, aside from the meteorologists who are doing an increasingly excellent job, the TV news networks are still lagging behind. But I will note that CNN devoted 7 full hours of their broadcasting to a climate town hall in which Democratic primary candidates were brought in one at a time and asked questions about their climate policy. This ran from 5 in the afternoon until midnight. And I will note that although they came in last in the primetime ratings, wait for it though, their ratings for that all-important 8 p.m. till 11 p.m. spot were higher than they usually are during the week. So, as Mark was saying, the data suggests that people are feeling like they want more information about climate change. They want to know what our elected representatives are going to do to transition us out of the fossil fuel era, this is becoming a story that people are interested in. So I think that, I mean, it's not just obviously my group. Of course, the IPCC released a really shocking report, as Mark was noting, in October of 2018, saying that we have 11 years to halve our emissions and 30 to cease them entirely, or else we're not going to have any chance at all to hit the 2C targets and maintain warming at a manageable level. And of course, the Swedish climate activist who is in New York City, having sailed across the Atlantic to come here, Greta Thunberg, has raised a global movement of youth climate strikers, which has also put climate change on the map. So I think in the past year, there's just been a sea change in public awareness and also in media awareness that this problem is real, it's happening now, and we are out of time to solve it.
Listeners, we can take a couple of questions for our guests, Genevieve Gunther, founder and director of EndClimateSilence.org, and Mark Hartsgaard from The Nation, who, along with partners at the Columbia Journalism Review, is spearheading this kind of massive media coverage this week that he says now over 300 news organizations, at least dealing with the topic leading into the UN Climate Action Summit next week. So 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. If you're here in the green space, just raise your hand and we can come around with a microphone. So raise it high so they can see you in the aisles, our producers. And while we're finding people to talk, there's a difference, as you know, as a journalist, Mark, between journalism and activism. Yeah. Journalists are paid to be skeptics of all kinds of claims and to fact check and contextualize and compare competing solutions and all that stuff. So where does that fit in? And I've seen, some complaints in conservative media that all they want the environmental coverage to do, certainly Fox News said this about CNN's Climate Town Hall, that all they did was ask questions about how bad is it, what are you going to do with it, kind of bidding war to the top without bringing journalistic skepticism to it, was the complaint. How do you contextualize yourself as a journalist, but also trying to bring more attention to this issue?
Our job as journalists is to find out and share as best we can the truth. People who complain about that coverage need to read the science. The only thing that our collaboration, Covering Climate Now, insists upon is that your coverage be grounded in the facts of the science. And therefore, to complain that somehow you ask questions about what the science says is journalistic foolishness, frankly. And the idea that it is somehow activism to put this story front and center. It is the overriding story of our time. It is the defining story. It is the story within which every other news story takes place within this changing climate. We would be and have been remiss as journalists if we have not made that clear to the public. And part of what we were thinking with Covering Climate Now was that there was a critical mass of journalists within our profession who knew that this was the story we should be doing a lot more of and couldn't do it, either because of internal resistance or external criticism. And believe me, that's what that external criticism is designed to do, is to intimidate you from doing your job. And so when we started this, we thought if we can highlight this critical mass of journalists and news outlets who want to be doing more climate coverage, we can grow that critical mass. And that's exactly what's happened. We started with 60 news organizations, and it has grown to over 300 now. We have a combined audience around the world of over 1 billion people who have been getting this coverage this week, and we are not stopping after this week.
Let's take a green space question right here. We have the mic at somebody. Hi.
Hey, how are you? So one of the activists in the first segment mentioned that the plan tomorrow is to go around the bull on Wall Street, which I love because I see capitalism as incompatible with addressing this crisis. Obviously, cable news is a big problem, and even NPR and PBS have ExxonMobil and the American Petroleum Institute sponsoring them. And as your guest mentioned, many people have been speaking out and covering this for decades, and one of those people is Bernie Sanders and his strong belief in social democracy. Can we rely on a system of regulated capitalism, corporate philanthropy, or public-private partnership to react with anywhere near the speed and scale we need to address the climate crisis?
Genevieve, you want to take that?
Well, I'm not a policy analyst, but it seems to me that there is no way to create a new market for renewable energy and sustainable agricultural practices and a completely reformed transportation industry without the government making massive public investments in our future. That's what they did in World War II to transform industry into a weaponry making machine, and they did it very successfully. And indeed, if we're going to decarbonize our economies in the time frame that the science requires, we are going to have to join the public and the private sectors together to focus all of our resources on this problem. We cannot say, however, in my opinion, that it is only capitalism that is the problem, because of course communist states also burned fossil fuels. And I also think having Trump in the White House shows that there might be a reason to keep the means of production out of government hands. That said,
that's a means of communication.
That said, indeed.
That could be our whole next special.
Exactly. That
we'll have
said,
the two of you, and
we need absolutely a prioritizing of public goods and not profit in order for our civilization to survive.
Well, that's also what Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal is. Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal is a form of, he would call it democratic socialism. It's what you see now in Scandinavia. It's what you saw in this country during the New Deal of the 1930s.
Right.
And I'm just going to mention that Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal, as we reported in The Nation magazine yesterday, and I was able to ask Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, about this, all the Democratic candidates now basically support one form, leading candidates, one form or another of a Green New Deal. Only Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal, however, matches the science. And how does he do that? He does that because he realizes that the only Green New Deal that can match the science is a Green New Deal that is global. In other words, the U.S. cannot only green its own economy, it must help developing countries to leave coal behind, and Bernie Sanders wants to do that. And Secretary General Guterres said that he would welcome that.
Is there, and briefly on this, because I only got one more caller in, and then we're going to run out of time. There might be, quote unquote, moderate Democrats or other people out there who say, wait, in order to be committed to solving the climate problem, the existential climate problem facing the Earth, do I also have to buy into democratic socialism?
No, you don't. You have to buy into smart government policy. And, I don't think that this idea, we right now are subsidizing the oil industry to destroy the planet. There's $400 billion of subsidies from governments around the world that are going towards this. So it's not a question of democratic socialism or not. It's what is the government, which side is the government going to take? It's taking a side, and right now it's taking the wrong side.
On line 2, Stephanie in Manhattan. Stephanie, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for taking my call. I just wanted to make an observation or expand on what the lady was saying about the media. I'm a financial advisor, and I watch CNBC and Bloomberg, et cetera, daily. Mm-hmm. And I can say without any exaggeration, they never make a comment about the climate change or ESG investing. If you're a daily watcher of the financial channels, the silence is deafening on these issues. And if and whenever it's discussed, it's always framed as the opportunity cost of or a ping on profits, as if, wow, if the company can't dump the toxins in the river or whatever it is, third quarter earnings are going to be damaged. And that seems to me really, really has to change.
It's a great
the back door, I know I have to go. The back door on this is that we all have 401ks. So even for populations who say, well, I don't invest in the stock market, even if you have $1,000 in your 401k, we're actually all complicit in this.
Mm-hmm. Stephanie, thank you so much. Genevieve, it's really a great focus for, critiquing media finance, like, is the business press bringing climate into the conversation in the most contextualized possible way?
Well, obviously they're absolutely not doing that. But Bill McKibben has a article in the New Yorker, I think it's in the comment section of this week, about the fact that There are 3 major financial institutions that are lending money to the fossil fuel industry so that they can increase exploration for reserves that absolutely need to stay in the ground if we're not all going to die. And that perhaps the next political movement is to target those financial institutions and get them to stop lending money to the fossil fuel industry.
One more, line 9, Susan in South Orange. Susan, you're on WNYC.
Hi, thanks for taking my call and for this discussion, and congratulations to Mark and everybody else on the heightened awareness this week. It's terrific. My question has to do with labeling. The monochromatic labeling of climate seems to create another silence, and that is it bypasses the reality that we're still warming the atmosphere, and people need to understand how their actions continue to warm. So my question is, in a very diverse society, don't we want the richest language, the goal of caring for our common home, as Pope Francis says, the goal of regeneration, just a much richer language than just climate, which focuses on after-the-fact impacts of global warming?
Thank you very much. And Genevieve, I'll give this to you in the context of your interest in semantics, if I can call it that, by writing that critique in Slate of how we use the word we in talking about the climate threat. And also, I think people are confused about this. Do you both prefer to use the term climate change or global warming, or are they synonymous as far as you're concerned? Genevieve?
Well, they're not synonymous, obviously. Global warming is the temperature rise that is produced by adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, and climate change is the sort of systemic change that happens after you start warming the temperature of a planet. I think both of those terms need to be retired, and we all need to start talking about climate breakdown, climate destruction, and the climate emergency.
And the we that you critiqued in your Slate article when the media writes stories or broadcast stories that have the language of, oh, we could have prevented this if only ... and we have to stop doing this or that. Why don't you like that?
I mean, it's inevitable since climate change is a global problem. It's easy to use the word we are doing X or we need to do Y. But in fact, this we is this ideological construct that actually hides who's responsible for climate change. So does the we include the 700 million people who live on less than $2 a day and never emit greenhouse gases? Does it include the 5 billion people who live on less than $10 a day and don't emit greenhouse gases? Does it include indigenous people who lived in harmony with their ecosystems for generations? Does it include our children? I mean, obviously it doesn't. So we have to be very clear about who's responsible for this crisis. Those are the people in the industries and the politicians that are colluding with them. And we have to know that we are not those people, and we are going to fight and do everything we can to save ourselves.
Mark, 15 seconds. Go ahead and applaud. 15 seconds. Climate change, global warming, or other.
That framing of we is a right-wing talking point, as Elizabeth Warren and Greta Thunberg have both pointed out. That's exactly what the fossil fuel industry wants you to think, that changing your recycling patterns is what's going to fix this, as opposed to changing the economic and governmental policies that are driving this. Mm-hmm. You can use global warming, you can use climate change, climate disruption. I've been writing about this for 30 years. I use them all depending, but the point is to get the facts across. Don't blame yourselves, blame the 100 companies that are driving this crisis.
Please thank Genevieve Gunther, founder and director of EndClimateSilence.org, and Mark Hartsford from The Nation magazine. Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the green space. Coming up next, we will play Is It Recyclable or Is It Not? Stay with us.
For homeless people in New York City, sometimes sleeping in the subways is safer than on the streets or in shelters.
I would like for people to understand that I don't think they're here because they want to be here. I think they feel like they don't have a choice.
The We the Commuters reporting project is focusing on homelessness in the subways. We're hearing from different people, asking how we can hold those in charge accountable and what we could do better. Listen all this week on Morning Edition and All Things Considered on WNYC.
WNYC supporters include HSS, advancing orthopedics for 156 years, and now the nation's #1 hospital for orthopedics for 10 straight years, according to U.S. News & World Report. More at hss.edu. the nonprofit nonpartisan RAND Corporation. RAND researchers are developing innovative policy insights to help stem the tide of the opioid crisis. Learn more about RAND's insights and analysis at rand.org.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the green space today. And if you're not live streaming our video, folks, you should do it now because you're going to want to see this as we conclude this Green Space Climate Special with the first ever Green Space Green Game. The name of the game, is it recyclable or is it not? So radio listeners, we stream live video that you can get to at the WNYC website, wnyc.org. You can go to the Brian Lehrer Show Twitter or Facebook pages or the Green Space page, any of those. We'll have the link for the live video stream if you want to see the items that we are about to judge as recyclable or not. And with us for this, as our Green Space Green Game judge, is someone I will describe as New York City recycling royalty. She is Christina Datz-Romero, Executive Director of the Lower East Side Ecology Center. You may know them even if you don't live on the Lower East Side because they come to different neighborhoods for electronics recycling and other things, among the things that they do. Also on the stage with us is WNYC news anchor Sean Carlson. And here's how this will work. Oh, please welcome them. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know it's different in person. I'm sorry.
Here's how this is going to work. What our Green Space audience can see, but you all listening on the radio cannot, is that we have a basket of items. I'm going to call it the basket of, I'm done with this. I will pick one item at a time from the basket and ask Sean, is it recyclable or is it not? You in the Green Space audience will then vote with your applause whether you agree with Sean's judgment or not, and then Judge Datz-Romero will give us the answer, and we'll talk briefly about why or why not. Okay, you ready?
Brian, can I ask, do they win your voice on their home answering machine? Everybody in this room. Thank you. Yes, applause. Yes, great.
No, but they win all this stuff I'm throwing away.
You get the trash.
And have you ever been a game show contestant before,
No.
Sean?
I come from a family of Jeopardy fans, though, so I feel like I have the knack of it.
But you've never been on Jeopardy?
No, absolutely not.
Family Feud?
I would never make the cut, no.
Not even The Bachelor?
No. Hi, I'm Sean Carlson at WNYC.
All right. Let's start with sort of an obvious one. I'm holding up a water bottle. Sean, is it recyclable or is it not?
Definitely recyclable.
Who agrees?
Yeah.
Who thinks it's not recyclable? Okay.
Wow.
Christina, did they all get it right?
Well, it's definitely recyclable, and it's probably the easiest thing in your basket. So great to start with something that's easy.
Oh, jeez.
Good going, Sean.
I was told not to study, so I would be fresh for this game.
Okay, so that one was easy. Let's see. I'm going to go next to this manila envelope lined with bubble wrap. Okay, I get this in the mail. I think, it's junk mail. It's paper on the outside. I'm going to put it in the paper recycling. Sean, is it recyclable or is it not?
I feel like you're trying to trick me. So what I feel like is you have to separate the paper from the plastic and put them in two different containers.
How many of you agree with that?
Wow.
Or don't agree with that? Christina, did Sean get it right or Sean get it wrong?
Sean got it right. So if you want to recycle those two items, you separate them because one is paper that can totally be recycled with your curbside recycling program. And the bubble wrap inside would be recyclable with plastic bags. So there is a program in New York City, any store over 15,000 square feet of retail space need to offer opportunities for customers to recycle plastic bags, and that bubble wrap would fall into that category. So it's not as convenient as just dropping it into a bin, a little bit of work involved, but it's totally recyclable, both of those. Thanks.
All right. Our next item is this snack wrapper. It's one of those with a silver interior. So, you can get, this one happens to be of cheddar flavored goldfish, baked, not fried. And You can see this and you go, well, it kind of feels like plastic on the outside, but that thing on the inside, it kind of feels like metal. So, Sean, is this recyclable?
This is tricky. What is that material on the outside? That's plastic, right? So it's metal coated in plastic?
I don't claim to know.
I'm going to say that's not recyclable just because it's so bizarrely put together that it would be impossible to separate those two things.
Agree, audience? Okay, so that's overwhelming agreement. Christina, did they get it right?
Yeah, Sean got it right, and the audience did too. And I just wonder why they ever moved away from the paper packaging that they used to use for the goldfish. So, but this is definitely not recyclable.
Is it aluminum? What metal is that?
It's aluminum, but because it's also a lot of plastic in there, and it's a composite thing, and nobody really will go through this effort to separate them out to get them recycled.
Yeah. Now, listeners, in case we get through our entire basket of I'm done with this, we could take a couple of questions for Christina Datz-Romero from the Lower East Side Ecology Center of things that you might have at home or you come across that you wonder, is it recyclable or is it not? So if you have a question, that's all we're going to take on the phones, is a question about is something recyclable or is it not? 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. All right, I'm now going to take the biggest item out of the basket of I'm done with this because it's blocking everything else. This is, I think you call it Melmac or resin bowl. It's kind of a fairly large white bowl that feels like plastic, knocks like plastic, but it doesn't have one of those recyclable numbers on it. People might put fruit in here or something like that on a dinner table or a coffee table. Sean, is it recyclable or is it not?
This one's tough. I feel like it counts as ceramics or something like that, so no. Will you throw out a jar or like a clay jar or something like that? No is the answer.
He's saying no. What are you saying, Green Space audience? You're saying no. Is that a no? How about if you think yes?
Ooh, that's evenly divided.
Yeah. I think more people agreed with you, but Christina, how about it?
Well, I actually called our recycling company here in New York City to find the answer because I wanted to give the right answer, and it's a no.
What is there a sort of a concept there in general? If you have hard plastic, but it doesn't have a recycling number on it, and I think we're only supposed to recycle numbers 1, 2, and 5 anyway. Are those the right numbers?
Well, the numbering system is a little bit flawed because not all plastic items have numbers on it, and then you start really guessing. And so what the city is trying to communicate is to say anything that's rigid plastic is recyclable. But of course, this is a rigid plastic and it's not. So there's always exceptions to the rule. But I think the numbers, for example, what's really more and more now in our shelves are these food pouches, like a lot of baby food, for example, is being sold in that. And that's a number 1 plastic, but because it is soft, it's actually not recyclable. So the numbers is a flawed concept. I think rigid materials, jars, bottles, that is really what you should look for.
We're going to continue with Is It Recyclable or Is It Not? Live from the Green Space right after this.
One of the best parts of being retired is I get to be a WNYC junkie. Are you kidding?
WNYC Listeners Legacy Circle member Janet Mardfin.
WNYC is a community, and I'm part of it. And being a Legacy Circle member, it's a way of leaving a mark on New York City, which is my home.
Include WNYC in your estate plan. Call 646-829-4587 or email legacygiving@wnyc.org.
Support for WNYC comes from John Thur Cancer Center at Hackensack University Medical Center, a consortium member of the NCI-designated Georgetown Lombardi Comprehensive Cancer Center. More at jtcancercenter.org. Geico Insurance, celebrating over 75 years of providing auto insurance for drivers across America. Geico can also help insure motorcycles, RVs, homes, and more. More at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO. Join New York Public Radio's Community Advisory Board in conversation with Depelsha Magruder, Interim CEO, and share your feedback about WNYC. Monday, September 23rd at 6:30 p.m. in the Green Space. Details at wnyc.org/cab.
This is WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Brian Lehrer with you on WNYC, live in the Green Space today. We are wrapping up the show with a Green Space Green game. We are playing Is It Recyclable or Is It Not? With WNYC newscaster Sean Carlson as our sacrificial lamb, making the initial judgments, the Green Space audience agreeing or disagreeing with his judgment item by item, and the final word, the definitive word, from Christina Datz-Romero, Executive Director of the Lower East Side Ecology Center Recycling Royalty. She is in New York City. And one more time, if you're just joining us, you can watch the rest of this by going to the live video feed from the Green Space at WNYC.org or the Brian Lehrer Show social media pages or the greenspace.org. Okay, the next item up is a fruit container. This is a hard plastic fruit container, sort of a clamshell design, you might call it, except it doesn't exactly look like a clam. This is, let's see, Family Tree Farms plum cuts, part plum, part apricot, all delicious. But you might find a lot of kinds of fruit coming in this kind of thing. So, Sean, is it recyclable or is it not?
I think this is an easy one. Although, I will say, I heard some murmurs in the audience. So, I have to say, we have to pat ourselves on the back. We're doing a great job so far. I don't want to let you down, but I'm going to say yes, because it's very much like the plastic water bottle.
Do you agree? They agree. Christina?
Yes, I also have to say yes, it is absolutely recyclable.
And this has a number 1 on it, actually. So this is number 1 recyclable, like the bottles. All right, here we go. We're going to... Some of you may remember seeing things like this back in... Did we establish earlier in the show that 2018 was a long time ago? How about 1982? The CD and CD case. So 2 different guesses. The CD itself, Sean, and the CD case. I think we all know what these jewel cases looked like when our grandparents were listening to see. Ha 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 ha.
It's cool though to have a record player. That's what we do in Brooklyn, you know.
Yeah, Joe Biden's going to come over and spin some discs with you.
All right, this is my very.
He's going to scratch them though, you know, like
DJ Biden. I'm going to say, you know, it never occurred to me what a CD is actually made out of. I mean, it's a plastic, right? Yeah. So. Yes, but they go in different places.
Yes, but they go in different places, audience?
Oh, wow, that's a very tepid response.
All right, so let's see. Neither of them are recyclable. How many of you think that? How many of you think the case is recyclable, but the CD itself is... Okay. Christina, what's the answer?
Wow, this is really a sophisticated audience here.
What am I, chopped liver? What are you talking about?
And Sean is catching up to the game too. So the jewel case is recyclable with your curbside program because it's rigid plastic. The CD is also made out of plastic, but you cannot just put it into that program. Very few places that actually would accept that for recycling, but our organization would. So the Lower East Side Ecology Center has an e-waste recycling program where we go around to different neighborhoods accepting computers, printers, TVs, but we also accept CDs.
And what do you do with them? Who actually takes them for recycling?
So we ship them to a recycler called Green Disc, And you can also ship your materials like that directly to them. They charge us a fee, and that's why we also charge a fee for getting something like that recycled. That would also be your VHS tapes, if you really want to
that's a real
go back in time. Cassette tapes, all what we call media, we would accept for recycling.
And how about this as a segue from that? Sean, you may recognize this device.
I know. I feel like I have to know this one. I'm going to let all of us down.
Known as a microphone. What if I have a microphone that I'm done with? I actually do have a microphone at home that I'm done with.
As do I, and now I'm worried about it.
What should I do with Sean, what should we do with them? Are they recyclable?
I would say that it's disposed in the same way as you would dispose of a cathode ray television or a iPhone.
Which is what?
Not cathode ray.
You mean throw it away?
It's recycled with electronics, which are recycled?
Okay.
I have my game face on.
I know. I'm trying to read her expressions here, and she's not letting me in on anything.
All right, audience, is it recyclable? Yes, that's a yes. Not recyclable. Everybody's confused about the microphone,
Yes.
Christina.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, a microphone is an electronic device, and it would be recyclable, but not as conveniently as bringing it downstairs into a recycling bin. You would have to bring it to an e-waste event or to a retailer that accepts electronics for recycling.
This is probably as good a time as any in the segment for you to say, Christina, how the Lower East Side Ecology Center goes around and does these e-waste events. I think when you were at my neighborhood a couple of years ago in Upper Manhattan, you were physically there, and I came with this basket of e-waste. And, oh, Christina, hi.
Yeah, sure. So we have a program that we started in 2004 where we really wanted to offer a collection of electronic waste, because this was really 2004, some time back. This is when there were not a lot of opportunities yet to recycle your electronics. But if you think about it, electronics have really changed our lives, how we communicate, how we work. And then we have all these devices that are loaded with heavy metals, with also sometimes very precious metals, and we can't just throw them in the trash. So we started this program many months ago, and now we go to different neighborhoods, and we have to come back to Inwood. Brian, I know we haven't been there in 2 years, so next spring we're going to be there.
We look forward. We all look forward to your arrival. We had a question from the audience of, is something recyclable or something not? Yeah, it's over there. Hi.
Someone in my household orders a lot of takeout. I'm not going to throw her under the bus.
Me too, it's okay.
And so we're always getting plastic spoons and forks. And sometimes I put them in the recycling. Sometimes I'm like, they're not recyclable. They're too small to have a number on them. And so for the ones that aren't marked as compostable or aren't marked as biodegradable, are they recyclable? And if not, and I put them in the recycling, what happens to them?
All right, Sean, is it recyclable or is it not? The plastic spoons and forks from takeout.
Absolutely, yes.
Christina?
I would say no.
Oh, jeez.
Why not if it's hard plastic?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, because it's really... It's a lot of the cutlery, some of it is also from biodegradable plastic, so it's very hard to tell the two apart. And if you have biodegradable plastic that gets melted with the other plastic to get recycled, it actually destroys the whole batch. So I say no.
How about that? Even if it's the harder, there are softer and there are harder plastic pieces of plasticware. Even the really hard ones.
Nuances of plasticware, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let me see if I can get two in here before we run out of time, because everybody wants to know about this 4-pack of Duracell AA batteries. Ooh. Sean, recyclable or not?
I mean, there's protocol for disposing of batteries that's different than throwing out. You can't just throw a battery in your trash, and I know that. So my answer is yes, recyclable.
Listeners,
oh jeez,
audience
your game face is terrified.
Batteries recyclable, not recyclable. Who says not recyclable? Once again, we have stumped the green space audience, who generally knows everything about everything. So, Christina, what do you think?
Right. So batteries are recyclable, and a lot of batteries should really be recycled. Sean was right. There oftentimes are warning on there. A rechargeable battery, for example, you can bring to any store that sells them. They are supposed to take them back for recycling. And also batteries, there's lithium batteries that absolutely need to be recycled, so they should be recycled. The alkalines have not as much toxic materials in it anymore as they used to, but they are still being accepted as a recyclable item.
Last item, it's a package of Glide Pro Health Deep Clean Floss Cool Mint.
Wow.
And so my question is two-part. The case and the floss itself. The case, Sean, recyclable?
The case, yes.
The floss?
No. Yes.
Okay, and what about the floss?
No.
The Sean. Okay. Audience, the case, the plastic case that it's in, recyclable? That's a general yes. How about the floss itself? No. Christina, we have 15 seconds.
Yes. The case, yes. The floss, no.
Even though some floss, I think including this, is plastic. Yeah. But you don't want to
Yeah,
put
you don't want to go there.
Sean Carlson, we crown you the first ever official Green Space Green Game Recycling Genius.
Yay.
If Brian won't do it, I will record a message on your home answering machine if you want.
And Christina, again, the work of the Lower East Side Ecology Center is so vital to the city. Just tell people how to contact you.
Sure, you can look us up as lesecologycenter.org or give us a call at 212-477-4022.
Please thank Christina Gatz-Romero. Thanks to everyone in our audience for coming to the Green Space today. And listeners, we hope this was good for you. Brian Lehrer on WNYC.
WNYC is supported by Riverside Memorial Chapel, for generations a symbol of Jewish tradition. More info about arranging or pre-arranging funeral services available at 212-362-6600 or riversidememorialchapel.com. WNYC is a media partner of Brooklyn Flea, with 60 vendors selling vintage